The small-town diner exuded a quiet charm, the kind of place where time seemed to slow. A warm sunbeam streamed through the window, casting golden light on the checkered tablecloths and the gleaming counter lined with vintage stools. Emily Carter, a retired Navy commander, sat at her favorite booth by the window. Her weathered leather jacket hung over the back of her seat, and her steaming mug of black coffee sat untouched on the table. She gazed outside, watching the world wake up, savoring the tranquility she had so desperately sought when she moved here. The bell above the door jingled, breaking her reverie. Martha, the diner's silver-haired owner, flashed her a warm smile as she refilled a nearby patron's coffee. "You're too quiet this morning, Emily," Martha teased, her voice soft but comforting. Emily offered a small smile in return. "Just soaking it all in." "Well, let me know if you need a top-up," Martha said, moving on to the next table. The smell of freshly baked apple pie wafted through the diner, blending with the scent of brewed coffee and sizzling bacon. It was the kind of peace Emily had yearned for after 2 decades of high-stakes missions. The peace shattered abruptly. The rumble of motorcycles grew louder, their engines roaring like caged beasts. Conversations hushed as 2 burly men strode in, wearing leather jackets emblazoned with a snake emblem. The taller one, a man with a scar running down his cheek, scanned the room, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Martha. His companion, stock-eared but just as menacing, stood with arms crossed, surveying the patrons like a predator sizing up prey. "Morning, sweetheart," the taller biker said, his voice dripping with false cheer. He leaned on the counter, close enough to invade Martha's space. "We missed you at last week's meeting. Got some business to discuss." Martha's hands trembled as she clutched the coffee pot. "I told you last time, Jake," she said, her voice steadied but strained. "I'm not paying for your so-called protection." Jake's smile vanished, replaced by a sneer. "That's a shame, Martha. The Steel Vipers don't take kindly to being ignored. Maybe you need a little reminder of how serious we are." The stockier man, Mike, chuckled darkly. "Should have just paid up, lady. Would have saved you a lot of trouble." Emily's sharp eyes tracked every movement. Her military instincts kicked in as she assessed the threat. Jake's swagger and Mike's posturing screamed intimidation tactics, but their lack of discipline betrayed them as amateurs. She noted Jake's poorly concealed knife tucked into his boot and the bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. Mike's clenched fists suggested he was ready for a fight but lacked formal training. Emily remained seated, her expression neutral, as Jake reached across the counter and grabbed Martha's wrist. The coffee pot clattered to the floor, spilling its contents as Martha gasped. "Let go of me," she demanded, her voice rising. Emily rose silently, her boots making no sound against the polished floor. She moved with the precision of someone who had spent years mastering control. "That's enough," she said, her tone calm but commanding. Jake turned, his sneer returning. "And who might you be, lady? Think you're gonna play hero?" Emily stepped closer, her gaze locked on his. "Let her go," she said evenly. "Now." Jake laughed, but the sound held an edge of unease. "Or what? You gonna call the sheriff?" "Go ahead. He's not gonna do anything." Emily didn't answer. Instead, she reached out with lightning speed, twisting Jake's wrist and forcing him to release Martha. He yelped in pain as Emily's grip tightened. Her free hand moved to block Mike, who lunged forward, only to find himself tripped and sent sprawling to the floor. The room went silent. Every patron stared, wide-eyed, as Emily maintained her iron grip on Jake. "I'm only going to say this once," she said, her voice low but filled with authority. "Leave now, or this will end badly for you." Jake tried to pull away, but Emily's strength held firm. He glared at her, his bravado slipping. "You have no idea who you're messing with," he spat. "Neither do you," Emily replied, releasing him with a shove. Jake stumbled back, rubbing his wrist. He shot her a venomous look before gesturing to Mike. "Let's go," Jake muttered, his tone laced with anger. "But this isn't over." The two men stormed out, the roar of their motorcycles fading into the distance. Emily turned to Martha, who was still trembling. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Martha nodded, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Emily picked up the fallen coffee pot and placed it on the counter. "You don't have to." "But this isn't over," she said, echoing Jake's words. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the morning sun had been replaced by gathering clouds. In her gut, she knew trouble was brewing. She had left the chaos of her Navy career behind, but it seemed chaos had found her anyway. Emily sat back down, her coffee now cold, and began to plan. If the Steel Vipers wanted a fight, they were about to learn what it meant to challenge someone trained to win wars. The next morning, Emily Carter returned to the diner, the tension from the previous day lingering like a storm cloud. Martha was behind the counter, her usual cheerful demeanor dimmed by worry. The familiar clatter of coffee mugs and quiet murmur of conversation felt muted, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Emily slid onto her usual stool, and Martha placed a steaming mug in front of her. "Morning, Emily," Martha said, her voice weary. "Guess I owe you a real thank you for yesterday." Emily took a sip of her coffee before responding. "No thanks needed. But you should tell me what's going on. Who were those men?" Martha's hand stilled as she wiped the counter. Her gaze darted toward the window, as though expecting trouble to roll in at any moment. "They're part of a gang called the Iron Vipers," she said quietly. "They've been running a protection racket in this town for months now. Businesses pay, or they suffer the consequences." Emily leaned forward, her expression sharp. "What kind of consequences?" "Windows smashed, stock stolen, cars vandalized. And if anyone tries to stand up to them," Martha trailed off, her face clouding. "Last month, Mr. Hadley at the hardware store refused to pay. He ended up in the hospital with a broken arm. He's been too scared to talk about it since." Emily's jaw tightened. She had seen this kind of intimidation before, in places far from home. "Why hasn't anyone done anything?" she asked. Martha sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Mayor Klein turns a blind eye. Says it's out of his jurisdiction. The sheriff," she hesitated. "Sheriff Reed's a good man, but he's in over his head. The Vipers are tied to something bigger, and he knows it." Emily's fingers drummed against her coffee mug. She had moved to this quiet town to escape the chaos of her past, but it seemed chaos had followed her. "You've been paying them?" Martha's cheeks flushed with shame. "I didn't want to, but they made it clear what would happen if I didn't. I've got this diner to think about. My livelihood." She hesitated, then added, "and the people I care about." Emily nodded slowly. "I understand. But this has to stop. They're preying on fear, and the longer they get away with it, the worse it will get." Martha's eyes searched Emily's face, hope flickering beneath her worry. "What can we do?" Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she drained her coffee and stood. "First, I'm going to have a chat with the sheriff." The sheriff's office was a modest brick building on the edge of town, its exterior faded and in need of repair. Emily pushed open the door, stepping into the small reception area. Sheriff Tom Reed sat at his desk, a man in his 50s with a weathered face that spoke of years of service. He looked up as she entered, his expression guarded. "Commander Carter," he greeted, rising to his feet. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Emily wasted no time. "I'm here about the Iron Vipers." Reed's shoulders tensed, and he gestured for her to sit. "I heard about what happened at the diner yesterday. Martha's lucky you were there." Emily remained standing. "Lucky isn't a strategy, Sheriff. This town needs better than luck. Why haven't you done anything about the Vipers?" Reed rubbed the back of his neck, sighing heavily. "You think I don't want to? I've tried, Commander. But the Vipers, they're not just a local gang. They've got connections to a larger network. Drugs, weapons, money laundering, you name it. If I push too hard, they'll bring the hammer down on this town, and I don't have the resources to stop them. Emily's eyes narrowed. So you're just going to let them terrorize the people you're sworn to protect? Reed's face hardened. Watch your tone, Commander. You've been here, 6 months? You don't know what it's like to fight this kind of battle when you're outnumbered and outgunned. You're right, Emily said, her voice steady. I don't know what it's like to fight alone. But I do know what it takes to win when the odds are against you. And it starts with refusing to back down. Reed sat back heavily in his chair, his expression conflicted. Even if I wanted to go after them, I don't have the manpower. They'd crush us. Emily crossed her arms. Then you'll have to let me help. Reed blinked, caught off guard. Help? What can you do? A lot more than you think, Emily replied. But I'll need information. Everything you've got on the Vipers, their operations, their leaders, their patterns. I'll also need you to keep your deputies out of my way. Reed steadied her, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. Fine. I'll give you what I have. But if this backfires... It won't, Emily said firmly. Back at her small house on the outskirts of town, Emily opened her laptop and logged into a secure network. Her fingers moved quickly, typing out an encrypted message to an old Navy comrade, Michael Reynolds, who had transitioned into private intelligence work. The subject line read, Urgent request for intel, Iron Vipers. Within minutes, her phone buzzed with a reply. Carter, Michael's voice came through the line, gruff but familiar. Didn't expect to hear from you. What's going on? Emily explained the situation, detailing the Vipers' activities and their grip on the town. Michael listened in silence before responding. Sounds like you've got your hands full. I've heard of the Vipers. They're small time compared to some of the players I've dealt with, but they're vicious. I'll see what I can dig up. Thanks, Michael. I owe you one. You owe me more than one, he said with a chuckle. I'll be in touch. Emily ended the call, leaning back in her chair. Her mind churned with possibilities, strategies forming like pieces of a puzzle. She hadn't planned to step back into this world, but the Iron Vipers had left her no choice. If the town's leaders were too afraid to act, she would do it herself. Time to remind them what it means to fight back, she muttered, determination hardening her resolve. For Emily Carter, the quiet life was over. Fate had indeed made other plans. The diner's back room became Emily's impromptu war room. Maps, photos, and notes covered the small table as she sketched out a plan to take on the Iron Vipers. Martha stood nearby, her arms crossed, a mix of anxiety and determination etched on her face. You're really serious about this, Martha said, her voice barely above a whisper. They've left us no choice, Emily replied. If we don't act now, they'll only tighten their grip on this town. Sheriff Reed's deputy, Claire Thompson, entered the room carrying a small box. She was young, with sharp eyes and a resolute demeanor. I've gathered some equipment we've used for local surveillance, she said, placing the box on the table. Cameras, audio bugs, and some older tracking devices. It's not state-of-the-art, but it'll get the job done. Emily gave her an approving nod. Good work, Deputy. It's exactly what we need. The sound of a motorcycle roaring outside made everyone tense. A moment later, the door creaked open, and a tall man in a leather jacket stepped inside. His face was partially hidden by a bandana, but his eyes scanned the room with practiced wariness. Tom, Martha said, relaxing slightly. I wasn't sure you'd come. Tom pulled down his bandana, revealing a rugged face marked by scars and a grim expression. I said I'd help, he said gruffly. But let's be clear, I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. The Vipers have been cutting into my gang's territory for months. Taking them down is as much about survival for me as it is for you. Emily stepped forward, her gaze steady. As long as we have the same goal, your reasons don't matter. What can you tell us about their operations? Tom crossed his arms. They're running protection rackets, sure. But that's just the surface. The real money comes from moving contraband, drugs, stolen goods, and recently, weapons. They've got a few stash houses in town and a couple of big players keeping everything running smooth. Emily tapped the map on the table. Do you know where these stash houses are? Tom nodded, pointing to 3 locations marked with red pens. Here, here, and here. The first 2 are smaller, mainly for cash and product. The third one is their main hub. That's where they're planning something big. Claire leaned in, her brow furrowing. Something big like what? Tom hesitated before answering. Word is, there's a weapons shipment coming through soon. Military-grade stuff. They're planning to move it through this town to distribute across the region. If that happens, they'll be untouchable. The room fell silent. Emily's mind raced, piecing together the implications. This wasn't just about saving the town anymore, it was about preventing the Vipers from becoming a regional power. Finally, Emily spoke. We're going to stop them. But we'll need to be smart about this. She turned to Claire. We'll start by planting surveillance equipment at their key locations. Can you handle that? Claire nodded. Absolutely. Emily turned to Tom. I need your gang to keep an eye on the Vipers. Watch their movements, but don't engage. We can't afford to tip them off. Tom smirked. Spying on rivals? That's my specialty. Martha cleared her throat, drawing their attention. And what about me? I'm not just going to sit here while the rest of you risk your necks. Emily smiled faintly. Martha, your diner is the hub of this town. People talk here. If you hear anything, even the smallest detail, I need you to let us know. Martha nodded resolutely. Consider it done. Over the next 2 days, the team worked tirelessly to gather intelligence. Claire and Emily planted cameras and audio bugs at the stash houses, often working under the cover of darkness. Tom's gang kept a watchful eye on the Vipers, reporting their movements to Emily. Meanwhile, Martha's diner became an unofficial headquarters, with regular updates shared over coffee and pie. One night, as Emily reviewed the surveillance footage in her small living room, Claire burst through the door. We've got something, she said, her voice urgent. Emily followed Claire to the laptop set up on the table. On the screen, a grainy video showed 2 Vipers loading crates into a van parked outside their main hub. The audio crackled, but their conversation was clear enough. Shipments coming in Thursday night, one man said. Boss says everything's gotta be ready by then. No screw-ups. What's in the crates? The other asked. Guns. Big ones. Enough to arm a damn army. Emily's eyes narrowed. She paused the video and leaned back in her chair. Thursday night, she murmured. That gives us 3 days. Claire's face was pale but determined. What do we do? Emily stared at the screen, her mind working at lightning speed. We disrupt their operation. We intercept the shipment, gather evidence, and expose their network. But we'll need precise timing and coordination. The next morning, Emily called the team together in the diner's back room. Tom arrived first, his expression grim. My guys are hearing the same thing, he confirmed. Weapons shipment, Thursday night. It's going to be heavily guarded. Martha entered with a tray of coffee and set it down. Heard a couple of Vipers talking this morning, she said. Something about the mayor signing off on a permit for a special delivery. Claire's jaw clenched. The mayor's in on this? Emily nodded grimly. It's no surprise. Corruption is what's kept the Vipers in power. But if we can prove his involvement, we can take him down along with them. She gestured to the map on the table. Here's the plan. Tom, your gang will create a diversion to draw their attention away from the shipment. Claire and I will intercept the van and secure the evidence. Martha, we'll need you to keep the townspeople calm. We can't have anyone getting caught in the crossfire. Tom raised an eyebrow. And what happens if they catch on? Emily's gaze was steely. Then we'll remind them why they should never underestimate this town. The countdown to Thursday night began. Emily spent hours refining the plan, running through every possible scenario. She knew the risks were high, but failure wasn't an option. This was more than a fight for Port Haven, it was a fight for justice, and Emily Carter was determined to win. The night of the operation was cool and quiet, the streets of Port Haven shrouded in darkness. Emily Carter stood in the shadows outside the first stash house, her team positioned and ready. She adjusted the earpiece in her ear, her voice low but firm as she gave final instructions. Everyone knows their role. Stay sharp, and we'll be in and out before they know what hit them, Emily said. Her calm confidence steadied the team as the adrenaline coursed through them. Deputy Claire Thompson crouched behind a nearby car, scanning the area with binoculars. 2 guards at the main entrance, she reported. Looks like one's armed with a shotgun, the other with a pistol. What about the side entrance? Emily asked. Tom, the rugged biker who had reluctantly joined the team, chimed in over the radio. Clear. No movement. If we're going in quiet, that's our best shot. Emily nodded, motioning to Claire and Tom. We'll take the side entrance. Martha, you stay on comms and let us know if anything changes. Back at the diner, Martha sat at the counter with a radio in hand, her nerves evident but her resolve unshaken. Got it, Emily. Be careful, she said, her voice steady despite the tension. Moving with practiced precision, Emily led the team toward the side entrance of the stash house. The dim glow of a security light cast long shadows, but they stayed out of sight. Emily signaled to Tom, who expertly picked the lock on the door. Within seconds, they were inside. The interior of the stash house was a cluttered maze of crates and shelves stacked with contraband. Emily's sharp eyes scanned the area, her military training kicking in. She gestured for the team to fan out, each member taking their assigned position. Claire, check those crates, Emily whispered. Tom, keep an eye on the hallway. I'll cover the main room. Claire pried open a crate, revealing bundles of cash and small bags of drugs. Looks like we hit the jackpot, she murmured. Emily activated her radio. Martha, call it in. Let Sheriff Reed know we've confirmed contraband. On it, Martha replied, quickly dialing Reed from the diner. Suddenly, the sound of heavy boots echoed down the hallway. Tom tensed, his hand hovering near the knife on his belt. We've got company, he hissed. Emily gestured for the team to take cover. A burly man stepped into the room, his flashlight sweeping across the crates. Before he could react, Emily sprang into action. In one fluid motion, she disarmed him, delivering a precise strike that left him unconscious. Move fast, Emily said, her voice firm. They'll notice he's missing soon. With Claire and Tom's help, Emily began planting small charges on the crates, designed to disable the contraband without causing a full-scale explosion. As they worked, Claire's voice cut through the quiet. Emily, someone's coming. Emily turned to see a second guard entering from the main door, his pistol drawn. He barely had time to shout before Tom tackled him to the ground. Emily swiftly secured his weapon and restrained him. Nice work, she said to Tom. Just don't expect me to make a habit of it, he muttered. The team finished planting the charges and retreated through the side entrance just as headlights approached the building. Emily pressed the detonator, and muffled pops echoed from within. The contraband was destroyed, leaving the Vipers with nothing but ashes. The following morning, news of the operation spread like wildfire. The townspeople whispered about the daring raid that had dismantled one of the Vipers' key supply hubs. For the first time in months, there was a spark of hope. At the diner, locals gathered to share what they had heard. Martha moved from table to table, listening intently and passing along useful tidbits to Emily. The Vipers are scrambling, she reported. They're furious and don't know who to blame. Emily sat at her usual booth, reviewing the intel with Claire and Tom. This is just the beginning, she said. If we keep the pressure on, they'll make mistakes. And when they do, we'll be ready. Tom leaned back in his chair, a rare smile tugging at his lips. I'll admit, that was impressive. But Razor's not going to take this lying down. He'll hit back. Hard. Emily met his gaze, her expression unflinching. Let him. We'll be ready. Across town, in a darkened warehouse, Vincent Razor Quinn paced angrily. His lieutenants stood nervously nearby, wary of their boss's volatile temper. Razor was a man known for his ruthlessness, and tonight was no exception. How the hell did this happen? Razor snarled, slamming his fist onto a table. That stash house was supposed to be secure. One of the lieutenants, a wiry man with a nervous tic, cleared his throat. We're not sure who did it, boss. Some of the boys think it might be a rival gang. Rival gang? Razor scoffed. No one's stupid enough to come at us like this. Another lieutenant spoke up hesitantly. There's been talk around town. People are saying someone's standing up to us. Razor's eyes narrowed. Then find out who. I want names. And when you find them, I want them crushed. Back at the diner, Emily and her team strategized their next move. Martha interrupted, placing a fresh pot of coffee on the table. You've got more people on your side than you think, she said. After what you did last night, folks are ready to fight back. Emily glanced around the diner, noting the determined faces of the townspeople. She nodded slowly. Good. We're going to need all the help we can get. Tom looked skeptical. You really think a bunch of shopkeepers and farmers can take on the Vipers? With the right leadership, they can do more than you think, Emily replied. People just need to know they're not alone. Claire leaned forward, her voice firm. So what's the plan? Emily's eyes hardened. We keep hitting them where it hurts. Their money, their supply chain, their leadership. We make it impossible for them to operate in this town. Tom nodded reluctantly. Well, if Razor's coming for us, we might as well give him a reason to be angry. Emily allowed herself a small smile. Exactly. As the team dispersed, Emily stepped outside, the cool night air wrapping around her. She gazed down the empty street, knowing the fight was far from over. But for the first time, the scales were tipping in their favor. And she intended to keep it that way. The vandalism started just before dawn. Martha arrived at the diner early, as she always did, but instead of the familiar warmth of her small-town haven, she was met with shattered windows and graffiti scrawled across the walls. Enough, the red spray paint screamed, dripping ominously down the diner's facade. Martha's heart sank. Inside, tables and chairs lay overturned, the cash register smashed. She gripped her phone and dialed Emily with trembling hands. Emily arrived minutes later, her jaw tightening as she surveyed the damage. Claire and Tom followed close behind, their faces reflecting the same mix of anger and determination. They're sending a message, Tom said grimly, running a hand through his hair. They want you to back off. Emily crouched by the broken window, her eyes scanning the parking lot for any signs of who might have done this. Well, message received. But backing off isn't an option. The attack on the diner was just the beginning. By midday, news spread that Mr. Hadley, the elderly hardware store owner who had quietly supported Emily's efforts, had been brutally attacked in his shop. He was found unconscious, his store ransacked. Emily and Claire visited him at the small clinic where he'd been taken. Mr. Hadley's bruised face and bandaged arm spoke volumes about the lengths Razor was willing to go to. They said it was a warning, Hadley rasped, his voice weak but resolute. To stop helping you. But I won't. They can't scare me into silence. Emily placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You've already done more than enough. Rest now. We'll take care of this. Outside the clinic, Claire's hands balled into fists. This has gone too far, Emily. Razor's escalating. If we don't stop him soon. We will, Emily interrupted, her voice steely. But we need to be smart about it. He's trying to provoke us. If we act recklessly, we'll play right into his hands. Back at the diner, now partially boarded up but still functional, the team gathered to regroup. Martha brewed coffee for the group, her usual smile replaced with a determined set to her jaw. "We've got to hit him where it hurts," Tom said, pacing the room. "If we keep reacting, he'll keep pushing. We need to go on the offensive." Emily nodded. "Agreed. But first, we need more intel. Claire, have we picked up anything new from the surveillance?" Claire opened her laptop, bringing up the feed from one of the bugs planted at the gang's main hub. The screen showed Razor in a heated conversation with a man in a suit, one Emily recognized instantly. "Mayor Klein," Emily said, her voice laced with disgust. The audio crackled, but Razor's words were clear enough. "This shipment's happening, Klein. You make sure the cops stay out of it. When it's done, you'll get your cut." The mayor's response was less distinct, but his body language, nervous glances and reluctant nods, confirmed his complicity. Tom leaned over the laptop, his jaw tightening. "That shipment, it's bigger than I thought. This isn't just about guns for the Vipers. They're planning to arm other gangs too. This could put them in charge of half the state." Emily's mind raced. If the shipment went through, Razor's influence would grow exponentially, and Port Haven would become ground zero for his criminal empire. That night, Emily called a meeting in the diner, inviting key townspeople who had quietly supported their efforts. Despite the recent violence, the room was packed. Fear mingled with determination as Emily stood to address them. "I know you're scared," she began, her voice calm but firm. "Razor wants you to believe that he's unstoppable, that he can hurt you whenever he wants. But that only works if we let it." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "We're not just fighting for this town," Emily continued. "We're fighting for what's right. For our families, our businesses, our way of life. Razor's trying to take that from us, but he can't succeed unless we give in." Martha stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension. "She's right. He's trying to break us. But if we stand together, we can stop him." The townspeople's resolve solidified, their fear replaced with a flicker of hope. Emily outlined the plan, careful to keep it focused and achievable. She assigned tasks, gathering intel, spreading the word discreetly, and staying vigilant. In the days that followed, the team worked tirelessly. Claire coordinated with Sheriff Reed, quietly identifying deputies who could be trusted. Tom reached out to a few of his old biker allies, convincing them to join the fight. Martha's Diner became a hub of activity, with locals sharing information and offering support in small but meaningful ways. Emily, meanwhile, pieced together the details of Razor's plan. Surveillance footage and intercepted communications painted a chilling picture. The weapons shipment was set to arrive at the old dockyard on the outskirts of town. The location was isolated, making it easy for the Vipers to offload and transport the cargo without attracting attention. But the shipment's secrecy also presented an opportunity. With the right timing and coordination, Emily's team could intercept it before it disappeared into the Vipers' network. The night before the planned interception, Emily gathered her core team in the diner's back room. The atmosphere was tense, but focused as she laid out the final details. "The shipment's coming in tomorrow night," Emily said, pointing to a map spread across the table. "We'll position ourselves here, at the dockyard entrance. Tom, your crew will block their escape routes. Claire, you and the trusted deputies will create a diversion to draw their attention." Tom nodded, his expression grim. "And you?" Emily's eyes hardened. "I'll lead the main assault. We'll hit them fast and hard before they have a chance to react." Martha stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly. "And what about the mayor? He's not going to sit back and let this happen." Emily smiled faintly. "Leave the mayor to me. Once we have the shipment, his ties to Razor will be impossible to deny." That night, Emily stood outside the diner, gazing down the quiet street. She knew the risks they were taking. Razor's retaliation had already shown how far he was willing to go. But as she thought about the people inside, Martha, Claire, Tom, and the countless others who had placed their trust in her, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. "We'll stop him," she murmured to herself. "No matter what it takes." The fight was far from over, but Emily was ready. The Vipers had struck first, but now it was her turn to strike back, and this time, she wouldn't miss. The morning air was still when Emily placed the call. Her voice carried a weight of urgency as she spoke into the phone, explaining the situation to a trusted ally from her past. "I wouldn't be asking if it wasn't serious," Emily said. "These people are dangerous, and they're tearing this town apart. I need your team's expertise." The voice on the other end belonged to Logan Pierce, a former Navy SEAL who now ran a private security outfit. Logan's response was quick and decisive. "You've got us, Emily. Send me the details, and we'll be there within 24 hours. By nightfall, Logan's team arrived in Port Haven. Clad in tactical gear and armed with a mixture of experience and precision, they immediately began coordinating with Emily and her group. The once silent diner now buzzed with activity as maps, laptops, and radios filled the tables. "We've intercepted some chatter," Logan said, pointing to a screen displaying a decrypted communication. "The shipment's been moved up. It's coming in tomorrow night at the old shipyard, but they're doubling security." Razor's getting paranoid. Tom scowled. "That means more guns, more guards, and less time to prepare." Emily nodded, her mind already racing. "Then we'll adapt." "Logan, can your team handle the perimeter? We need eyes on every angle." "Consider it done," Logan replied. "But Razor's not just going to sit back and let us take this. If he's doubling down, he'll make a move to neutralize you first." Logan's warning proved prophetic. As the diner began to quiet for the evening, a convoy of motorcycles roared into town. Razor had sent his enforcers, a group of hardened criminals, with orders to eliminate Emily and anyone aiding her. Martha spotted them first from her position near the window. "Emily, we've got trouble," she said, her voice taut with tension. "They're coming this way." Emily grabbed her radio and called for the team to regroup. "Everyone, fall back to the diner. This is it." Within minutes, the diner became a fortress. Claire secured the doors while Logan's team took up defensive positions. Martha quickly moved civilians to safety through the back exit, herding them into a neighboring building. The first clash came swiftly. Razor's enforcers dismounted and began advancing, their leader's voice booming. "Emily Carter, you've been causing a lot of problems for us. Time to pay the price." Emily stepped out into the glow of the diner's flickering neon sign, her stance unwavering. "Leave now, and no one gets hurt," she called out. The leader laughed, a guttural sound filled with contempt. "You think you're in control here? You're outnumbered and outgunned. We'll see how tough you are when this place is in ashes." Without another word, the enforcers opened fire. Glass shattered as bullets struck the diner's facade, but Emily's team was ready. Logan's men returned fire with precision, forcing the attackers to scatter. Tom, stationed near the diner's rear, took down two enforcers attempting to flank them. "They're trying to surround us," he shouted. "Hold the line," Emily commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. The firefight raged for what felt like hours but was, in reality, only minutes. Claire spotted an opening as the enforcers began to falter. "They're regrouping near the alley," she yelled. "Logan, take your team and cut them off," Emily ordered. "Tom, cover their retreat. Claire, stay with me." Logan led his team through the back exit, moving swiftly and silently. Within moments, the sound of muffled gunfire signaled their success. The remaining enforcers, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat. "We did it," Claire said, her voice tinged with relief as the last of the attackers fled into the night. But the victory felt hollow. The diner was a wreck, its windows shattered and walls pocked with bullet holes. Martha emerged from the neighboring building, her face pale but determined. "Is it over?" she asked. Emily sighed, holstering her weapon. "For now. But Razor's not done. He'll come back stronger. The next morning, the town woke to the aftermath of the attack. Despite the damage, something had shifted. Townspeople began arriving at the diner, not to gawk but to offer help. Some brought supplies to board up the windows, while others offered food or simply words of encouragement. "We're with you, Emily," said Mr. Hadley, still nursing his injuries but standing tall. "Whatever it takes, we'll fight back." Emily felt a surge of pride. "Thank you. But this isn't just about fighting. It's about ending Razor's hold on this town for good." In the aftermath of the standoff, Logan's team intercepted a critical piece of intelligence, Razor's final plan. A decrypted message revealed that Razor was personally overseeing the weapons shipment, desperate to cement his control after the failed attack. Emily gathered her team that evening, her resolve hardened. "This is our chance. If we take that shipment, we not only stop Razor but destroy his operation completely." "It won't be easy," Logan cautioned. "He'll have his best men there, and they'll be ready for a fight." Emily's gaze swept across the room, landing on each of her allies. "We've faced worse. And we've won. This town deserves peace, and we're going to give it to them." Tom grinned, cracking his knuckles. "About time we ended this." The plan was set. As the team prepared for the final confrontation, Emily allowed herself a moment to reflect. Razor had underestimated her, not just her skills, but the strength of the community she now fought to protect. Tomorrow, that underestimation would cost him everything. "This ends now," Emily murmured to herself as she loaded her weapon. And she meant it. The evening air at the docks was heavy with tension. Emily Carter crouched behind a shipping container, her earpiece crackling with updates from her team. The plan was set, the pieces in place. Now, all they needed was for Razor to make his move. "All units, sound off," Emily whispered into her radio. "North perimeter secure," Logan replied. His private security team was stationed along the dock's outer edges, their eyes trained on every entry and exit. "South entrance is clear," Claire's voice came next, her determination evident despite the danger. "Overwatch in position," Tom added. From a nearby crane, he had a bird's-eye view of the entire dockyard. "I've got eyes on Razor's convoy." Emily's grip tightened on her radio. "Martha, status?" Back at the diner, Martha coordinated with the federal agents who had arrived that afternoon. "Feds are on standby," she said. "They're waiting for your signal." Emily nodded to herself. "Good. Everyone, stay sharp. This is it." As the hours ticked by, the dockyard became a hive of activity. Razor's men began unloading crates from unmarked trucks, their movements quick but careful. The shipment was larger than Emily had anticipated, a cache of high-powered weapons destined to arm gangs across the region. From her vantage point, Emily observed the operation, her mind working through every detail. Timing was everything. If they moved too soon, Razor's men could scatter, taking the shipment with them. If they waited too long, the weapons might disappear into the night. "They're unloading faster than expected," Tom warned over the radio. "You might want to call it soon, Commander." Emily exhaled slowly, her military instincts taking over. "Logan, close the perimeter. Claire, get ready to engage. Tom, keep eyes on Razor. Martha, alert the feds, it's time." At the diner, Martha relayed Emily's instructions to the federal agents. Within moments, black SUVs began rolling toward the docks, their headlights off to maintain stealth. The agents moved into position, their presence undetected by Razor's men. Meanwhile, in the heart of Port Haven, the townspeople gathered. Inspired by Martha's unwavering resolve, they had decided to take a stand. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a newfound sense of purpose, they prepared to document everything, ensuring Razor's crimes would be exposed to the world. Back at the docks, Razor's booming voice cut through the night. "Keep moving. I don't want any delays. We've got a lot riding on this." Emily signaled her team to hold. She could see Razor standing by one of the trucks, flanked by his lieutenants. He was arrogant, confident that his operation was untouchable. That confidence would be his downfall. "Now," Emily whispered. Logan's team moved first, cutting off the dockyard's exits. Razor's men reacted instantly, drawing weapons and shouting orders. Before they could organize, Claire's team advanced, using tear gas to create confusion. Razor's men fired blindly, their shots echoing through the night. Emily and Tom joined the fray, moving with precision. Emily's Navy training was evident in every step she took, every order she gave. She led her team through the chaos, dismantling Razor's defenses piece by piece. "Razor's heading for the boat," Tom called out from his perch. Emily's eyes darted toward the docks. Razor and two of his lieutenants were sprinting toward a small speedboat, crates of weapons in tow. If they made it to open water, the operation would be compromised. "Logan, cut him off," Emily ordered. "Claire, cover me. I'm going after him." Razor's boat roared to life, its engine cutting through the water as it sped away from the dock. Emily sprinted to a nearby skiff, her movements fluid and determined. Claire appeared at her side, tossing her the keys. "Go," Claire urged. "We've got things handled here." Emily nodded, starting the skiff's engine and giving chase. The cold wind whipped at her face as she navigated the choppy waters, her focus locked on the retreating speedboat. On board Razor's boat, the gang leader barked orders to his men. "Faster! We've got to lose them." But Razor's bravado faltered when he saw Emily gaining on them. He turned to his men, his voice rising in desperation. "Take her out." Gunfire erupted, bullets striking the water around Emily's skiff. She ducked low, weaving through the waves to avoid their shots. When she was close enough, she drew her weapon and returned fire, aiming for the boat's engine. Her shots were precise, disabling the speedboat and bringing it to a sputtering halt. Emily closed the distance, boarding Razor's boat with practiced ease. The fight that followed was brutal. Razor's men lunged at her, but Emily's training gave her the upper hand. Within moments, they were disarmed and restrained. Razor, cornered and out of options, glared at Emily. "You think this changes anything? There are more of us than you can count." Emily met his gaze, unflinching. "Maybe. But you won't be around to see it." By the time Emily returned to the docks, the federal agents had secured the area. Razor's men were in custody, and the shipment of weapons had been seized. The docks were quiet once more, the air heavy with the weight of what had been accomplished. Martha arrived shortly after, flanked by the townspeople who had stood vigil through the night. They cheered as Emily stepped off the boat, their gratitude evident in every word, every handshake. "You did it," Martha said, her eyes shining with pride. Emily shook her head. "We did it. This town stood together, and that's why we won." As dawn broke over Port Haven, the first rays of sunlight illuminated a community forever changed. Razor's reign of terror was over, and the town had reclaimed its strength. But for Emily, the work was far from done. Standing on the docks, she looked out at the horizon, a quiet determination in her eyes. There would always be others like Razor, others who thought they could prey on the vulnerable. But as long as she was there, they would learn the same lesson: small towns were not easy targets, and their people were far stronger than they seemed. "This isn't the end," Emily said softly, her voice carrying on the morning breeze. "It's just the beginning." The night air was sharp and cold, the faint scent of salt water mingling with the tension that hung heavily over the Port Haven docks. Emily Carter stood behind a stack of shipping crates, her sharp eyes scanning the shadowy expanse. The distant hum of engines signaled Razor's arrival, and her heart beat in a steady rhythm, mirroring her calm yet unyielding resolve. "Positions," she whispered into her radio. "North side covered," Logan's voice crackled back. "South entrance secure," Claire added, her tone steady but sharp. "Overwatch ready," Tom confirmed from his vantage point on a crane, his rifle trained on the approaching convoy. Emily's fingers tightened around her weapon. "Hold until my signal. Let them come to us." The convoy rolled into the dockyard with an air of unchecked arrogance. Razor stepped out of the lead truck, his imposing figure silhouetted by the headlights. Flanked by his lieutenants, he barked orders, his voice carrying over the still water. "Move it! Get those crates unloaded now. I want this shipment gone in 20 minutes." Emily watched as Razor's men began to offload the illicit cargo. Crates of high-powered weapons were stacked haphazardly near the loading bay, their contents gleaming ominously in the floodlights. Everything was proceeding as predicted. "They're making themselves comfortable," Logan murmured over the radio. "Good," Emily replied. "They won't see what's coming." The first strike came silently. Logan's team moved in from the north, disabling one of Razor's sentries before the man even realized he was being targeted. Claire's group hit the south entrance next, cutting off any escape routes. Razor's men, still busy unloading the shipment, remained oblivious to the tightening net around them. Emily crouched lower, her eyes fixed on Razor. The gang leader's confidence would be his downfall. She waited until he stepped closer to the edge of the dock, away from his men, before giving the signal. Now. Logan's team moved swiftly, launching a coordinated assault on the gang's perimeter. The sharp crack of suppressed weapons echoed across the docks, followed by the chaotic shouts of Razor's men scrambling for cover. "They're flanking us," one of the gang members yelled. Emily's team pressed their advantage. Claire led a group to secure the weapons crates, using flashbangs to disorient the gang members guarding them. Tom, from his elevated position, provided precise cover fire, picking off anyone who tried to regroup. Razor's voice roared above the chaos. "Fight back, you idiots. They're just a bunch of small-town heroes playing soldier." Emily stepped into the open, her weapon aimed squarely at Razor. "Drop it, Razor. This is over." The gang leader turned, his face twisting into a sneer. "You think you've won? This town isn't worth saving. People like you don't change anything." Emily's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe not. But people like you don't scare us anymore." Before Razor could respond, the wail of sirens filled the air. Federal agents stormed the docks, their black SUVs skidding to a halt. Agents poured out, weapons drawn, quickly overwhelming what remained of Razor's crew. The gang's resistance crumbled as the federal agents swept through the dockyard. Razor's lieutenants were apprehended, and the remaining gang members surrendered, dropping their weapons and raising their hands. The floodlights illuminated the scene, casting long shadows over the defeated men. Emily approached Razor, who now stood surrounded by agents. His bravado was gone, replaced by a mix of rage and disbelief. "You should have stayed out of this," he spat. "You've only delayed the inevitable." Emily stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "What's inevitable is justice. Your time is up." As the last of Razor's men were loaded into police vehicles, the federal agents began cataloging the seized weapons. The sheer volume of the cash was staggering. Crates filled with assault rifles, ammunition, and explosives, enough to wreak havoc across multiple states. Martha arrived at the docks, flanked by a group of townspeople who had stood vigil throughout the night. Their faces lit up with relief as they saw the gang's operation dismantled before their eyes. "You did it, Emily," Martha said, her voice thick with emotion. "You really did it." Emily shook her head, a faint smile on her lips. "We all did. This town stood together, and that's why we won." In the days that followed, Port Haven began to rebuild. The evidence collected at the docks not only secured convictions for Razor and his men, but also exposed the corrupt officials who had enabled their operation. Mayor Klein was arrested, and new leadership began to emerge, promising a brighter future for the town. The diner, once a target of Razor's wrath, became a symbol of resilience. Townspeople gathered there to share stories, offer support, and celebrate their hard-fought victory. Emily, ever humble, deflected praise, insisting that the credit belonged to everyone who had stood up against the gang. But Martha wouldn't let her off the hook so easily. One evening, as the diner buzzed with laughter and warmth, she approached Emily with a steaming cup of coffee. "You're a hero, whether you like it or not," Martha said, her eyes twinkling. This town owes you more than you'll ever know. Emily smiled, lifting the cup in a quiet toast. Here's to Port Haven. May it never need saving again. That night, as the stars glittered over the quiet town, Emily stood on the diner's porch, reflecting on all that had transpired. She knew there would always be challenges ahead, threats that would test the town's resolve. But she also knew that Port Haven was stronger now, its people united by a shared courage. As she looked out over the peaceful streets, Emily felt a profound sense of purpose. She had come to Port Haven seeking solace, but she had found something far greater, a community worth fighting for. And fight we will, she whispered to herself, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Together. The sun rose over Port Haven, casting golden light on the quiet town. For the first time in months, the docks were peaceful, the air no longer carrying the tension of Razor's control. The gang's reign had ended, and as the townspeople stirred awake, a renewed sense of hope began to settle over the community. At the diner, Martha poured fresh coffee into ceramic mugs, her hand steady despite the whirlwind of recent events. The place was bustling, filled with townsfolk who had come to celebrate their hard-won freedom. Conversations buzzed with relief and determination as people shared their plans to rebuild. Emily Carter sat at her usual corner booth, watching the scene unfold. Though she was tired, a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. This was what she had fought for, a community reclaiming its strength and unity. By mid-morning, federal agents swept through Town Hall. Led by Agent Rodriguez, the team systematically arrested the corrupt officials who had enabled Razor's operation. Mayor Klein was escorted out in handcuffs, his face a mix of anger and shame as cameras from local reporters captured every moment. It's over, Rodriguez said to Emily as they crossed paths outside the diner. With the evidence we collected, there's no way they're getting out of this. Emily nodded, her expression solemn. Justice is a start. The rest is up to the town. Rodriguez placed a hand on her shoulder. They have you to thank for that. Don't downplay what you've done here. Inside the diner, Sheriff Reed stood awkwardly by the counter, clearly out of his element in the celebratory atmosphere. The townspeople's trust in him had been shaken during Razor's control, and he knew it would take time to earn it back. Martha noticed his unease and called out, Sheriff, don't just stand there. Get yourself some coffee and sit with your neighbors. Reed hesitated before taking a seat at one of the communal tables. To his surprise, people welcomed him, sharing their ideas for rebuilding the town. Encouraged by their willingness to include him, Reed made a quiet vow to do better. Later, he approached Emily, who was stepping outside for a moment of quiet. I wanted to thank you, he began, his voice earnest. Not just for taking down Razor, but for showing me what real leadership looks like. Emily raised an eyebrow. You don't have to thank me. This town needed someone to stand up, and it turned out to be me. Reed shook his head. No, it's more than that. You inspired people to fight back, to believe in themselves again. That's something I need to learn how to do. Emily studied him for a moment before nodding. Then start by listening to them. They'll tell you what they need. Your job is to help them make it happen. The diner became a hub for recovery efforts. Townspeople came together to plan repairs, distribute supplies, and share stories of resilience. Martha's cheerful demeanor and endless pots of coffee kept the atmosphere light, even as the tasks ahead seemed daunting. One evening, a small ceremony was held outside the diner. The townspeople gathered to honor Emily and her team for their bravery. A makeshift plaque was unveiled, bearing the words, To those who stood against fear and fought for Port Haven, thank you for reminding us of our strength. Emily stood at the edge of the crowd, trying to avoid the spotlight. But Martha had other plans, pulling her forward to stand next to the plaque. This town wouldn't be here without you, Martha said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Emily's cheeks flushed slightly, but she met the crowd's gaze. It wasn't just me. It was all of you. You chose to fight back, to stand together. That's what made the difference. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing into the night. In the weeks that followed, the town began to heal. The docks, once a symbol of Razor's grip, were transformed into a bustling center of legitimate commerce. Businesses reopened, and children played in the streets without fear. Emily found solace in the small moments, helping a shopkeeper rebuild his storefront, sharing a quiet cup of coffee with Martha, or simply walking through the town she now called home. She had come to Port Haven seeking peace, and while the journey had been anything but quiet, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. One afternoon, she sat with Tom at the diner, discussing the future. "You ever think about sticking around?" she asked, sipping her coffee. Tom chuckled. "Me? A small town life? Not exactly my style. But I'll visit. This place grows on you." Emily smiled. It has a way of doing that. As the town continued to rebuild, Emily found herself drawn deeper into the community. She began teaching self-defense classes at the community center, empowering others to protect themselves. Her Navy training, once reserved for combat, now served a new purpose, helping others find strength in their own abilities. Martha watched her with a knowing smile one evening as Emily helped a group of teenagers practice basic techniques. "You found your place here, haven't you?" Martha said. Emily paused, glancing at the group. "I think I have. For the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm where I'm meant to be." Martha nodded. "You've given this town more than you realize. And it's given you something too." On the anniversary of Razor's fall, Port Haven held a town-wide celebration. Music filled the air, and the streets were alive with laughter. Emily watched from the sidelines, content to let the townspeople take center stage. Sheriff Reed approached her, holding a plate of Martha's famous apple pie. "You know, Emily, this town feels different now. Stronger. And a lot of that is because of you." Emily accepted the pie with a grin. "It's because of all of us. But I'll take the pie." As the celebration continued, Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Port Haven had become more than just a place to retire. It was a community, a family, and a testament to the power of resilience. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully embrace it. Her skills, honed in the chaos of war, had found a new purpose. She was no longer just a soldier, she was a protector, a mentor, and a member of a town that refused to be broken. And as the fireworks lit up the night sky, Emily Carter knew she was exactly where she belonged. Months had passed since Razor and his gang had been dismantled, and Port Haven had emerged stronger than ever. The docks, once a hub of criminal activity, now bustled with legitimate trade and local fishermen. Businesses had reopened, and laughter filled the streets as children played without fear. The town had become a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for other small communities grappling with similar threats. Emily Carter watched it all quietly. She had slipped back into her unassuming routine, preferring to blend into the fabric of Port Haven rather than stand out. But the people hadn't forgotten. To them, she was more than a retired Navy commander. She was the woman who had shown them how to fight for their town and their future. The diner had become the unofficial heart of the community. Martha, ever the gracious host, kept the coffee flowing and the conversations lively. On most evenings, the diner was packed with townspeople discussing everything from school fundraisers to plans for expanding the marina. Emily's usual corner booth remained her sanctuary. With a steaming cup of coffee in hand, she observed the vibrant life around her. Martha often teased her about her quiet demeanor, but Emily liked it that way. She didn't need recognition or fanfare. Seeing the town thrive was enough. One afternoon, a young woman approached her table. She looked nervous, clutching a notebook to her chest. "Excuse me, Miss Carter," the woman began. "My name's Lily. I'm from Clearwater, a town a few hours north of here. We've been having some trouble. My mom said I should talk to you." Emily gestured for Lily to sit. "What kind of trouble?" Lily hesitated, then opened her notebook to reveal a map of Clearwater. She pointed to a warehouse near the edge of town. "A group moved in about 6 months ago," Lily explained. At first, they seemed harmless, but now they're demanding money from local businesses. They've threatened anyone who speaks out. People are scared. Emily listened intently, her military instincts sparking to life. Clearwater's situation mirrored what had happened in Port Haven. She glanced at Lily, her calm gaze steady. "You're brave to come here," Emily said. "Do you have anyone in town willing to stand with you?" Lily nodded. "A few. But we don't know where to start." Emily leaned back, her mind already mapping out a plan. "The first step is gathering information. Do you know who's in charge?" Lily's eyes lit up with determination. "We can find out. Will you help us?" Emily's lips curved into a faint smile. "I'll guide you. But this is your fight, Lily. Clearwater needs to see its own strength. You'll be surprised at what your community can do when it stands together." Word of Port Haven's transformation had spread far and wide. Nearby towns began reaching out, seeking advice on how to reclaim their own communities. Emily's story had inspired a network of small towns to connect, sharing resources and strategies to combat the threats they faced. Martha's Diner became a hub for this growing alliance. Maps and notes filled a back room, where Emily quietly coordinated efforts with leaders from other towns. Deputies, business owners, and even former military personnel visited regularly, seeking her guidance. "You've started something big," Martha remarked one evening as she placed a fresh pot of coffee on the table. "You're not just helping Port Haven anymore. You're helping everyone." Emily glanced at the maps and papers spread before her. "It's not just me. These towns have the courage to stand up for themselves. I'm just showing them how." Martha smiled knowingly. "And that's why they keep coming to you." As the months rolled on, Emily's quiet influence continued to grow. She trained community leaders to organize their towns, teaching them to identify vulnerabilities and build alliances. Her former Navy teammates occasionally stopped by, lending their expertise to more complex situations. Together, they formed a loose but effective coalition dedicated to protecting small towns from exploitation. One day, Sheriff Reed joined her at the diner. He had become a respected figure in Port Haven, his renewed dedication to justice evident in every action he took. "Clearwater reached out to me," Reed said. "They're asking for help with some legal issues. Looks like your influence is spreading." Emily nodded. "It's a good sign. They're taking control of their future." Reed sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about what's next for you? You've already done so much." Emily looked out the window at the bustling street. "What's next is whatever comes my way. This isn't about me. It's about making sure towns like this one don't have to live in fear." Reed smiled. "Well, if anyone can do it, it's you." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily sat in her usual spot at the diner. The warm glow of the setting sun bathed the room in golden light, casting long shadows that danced across the floor. The townspeople bustled around her, their laughter and chatter a comforting backdrop. Martha joined her, sliding a fresh slice of pie onto the table. "On the house," she said with a wink. "You've earned it." Emily chuckled softly, taking a bite. "You know, Martha, I came here looking for peace. Instead, I found a purpose I didn't know I needed." Martha's expression softened. "And this town found a protector it didn't know it needed." They sat in companionable silence, watching as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky. The quiet woman in the corner had become more than a legend. She was a reminder that courage and community could triumph over fear. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Emily sipped her coffee, a faint smile on her lips. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she was ready. After all, the fight for justice and hope was never truly over. And in her heart, she knew, together, they could face anything.